Chapter 1, Lesson 1. The Land and States. What to know. How do the geography and climate differ as you travel across the 50 states? Identify and describe some of the major landforms and bodies of water in the United States. Learn the location of the 50 states and their capitals by the end of the year. Vocabulary: landform region, climate, environment, people, Robert Louis Stevenson, and places. Say it after me. Coastal plain, Appalachian mountains, interior plains, Mississippi River, Great Lakes, Rocky Mountains, Great Basin, Sierra Nevada. You are there. Imagine that you could live anywhere on Earth. Would you choose to live near the ocean or near mountains? Would you rather live in a region where winters are long and snowy, or where most days are sunny and warm? No matter how you answer these questions, you can find all these different places in the same country. The United States is a large country made up of 50 states. You may know what the land and climate are like in one state, but you may wonder how they differ in other parts of the country. The San Juan Mountains cover more than 12,000 square miles in southwestern Colorado. The United States. There's California. You can use this map to learn the names of all the states and their capitals. Which state capital is closest to Sacramento? A nation of 50 states. The United States is a nation of incredible beauty that is made up of 50 states, each with its own capital. Of the 50 states, 2 are separated from the others. The island state of Hawaii lies far to the west in the Pacific Ocean. Alaska, the northernmost state, is separated from the states to the south by the country of Canada. Because the United States is so large, geographers sometimes divide it into landform regions. A landform region has mainly one kind of landform, such as mountains, hills, plateaus, or plains throughout. Each region is unique or unlike the others because of the shape of its landforms and the way they came to be. Dividing the country into landform regions makes it easier to compare and contrast different parts of the country. Compare and contrast. How does the state of Hawaii differ from the other states in the nation? Let's look at that. Here's Hawaii. Here are the other states. Hawaii is a series of islands. So here we have landforms of North America. Let's go over them together. Everyone say coastal plains. Coastal plains. Appalachian mountains. Appalachian mountains. Central and interior plains. The Great Plains. So we can put all of this together and we can say the plains. The Rocky Mountains. And we'll call this other because it's many other areas. Great Basin, other areas. So we have mountains, plateau, hills, and plains. So our basin is a plateau. What mountain region lies to the east of the Mississippi River? So here's our mighty Mississippi River. What mountain region lies to the east? That's right, the Appalachian Mountains. Our next section, heading the coastal plain. In the late 1800s, a well-known writer named Robert Louis Stevenson traveled across the United States. Stevenson was living in Scotland when he received word that Fanny Osborne, his sweetheart, was ill. She was sick. Osborne lived in the United States, and Stevenson decided to go there. He did not realize how much his trip across the United States would teach him about the nation's geography and climate. Climate is the kind of weather a place has over a long time. On August the 7th, 1879, Stevenson left Scotland. He boarded a ship and spent 10 stormy days crossing the Atlantic Ocean. As the ship neared New York City, Stevenson looked out on a broad, tree-lined plain. This flat, low land along the Atlantic Ocean is part of a much larger region called the coastal plain. The coastal plain begins along the coast of Massachusetts as a narrow strip of land no more than 10 miles wide. It gets much wider farther south, near Florida. From Florida, the coastal plain extends west along the Gulf of Mexico into Texas and the country of Mexico. So what is the difference between the coastal plain in Massachusetts and in Florida? Our next section heading is called the Appalachians. Let's say that together. The Appalachians. Stevenson, Robert Louis Stevenson, did not stay in New York City long. Osborne lived on the Pacific coast of the United States, in San Francisco, California. To reach California, Stevenson boarded a train for the long journey to the western coast. When the train reached Pennsylvania, the land began to change. Instead of being flat, it was now filled with wide valleys and hills. This area of valleys and hills on the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains is called the Piedmont. Piedmont. Piedmont means at the base of a mountain. The Piedmont begins in New Jersey and extends as far south as Alabama. The tree-covered Appalachian Mountains rise above the Piedmont. This 2,000-mile-long mountain range, or group of connected mountains, runs from southeastern Canada to central Alabama. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains in North America. Over time, the mountain's peaks have been eroded or worn down by rain and wind. The highest peaks in the Appalachians are about 7,000 feet tall. A large part of the Appalachians is made up of a series of ridges and valleys that run next to each other. Among these ridges are the Great Smoky, Blue Ridge, Catskill, and White Mountains. So how is the Piedmont different from the coastal plain? coastal plain being low and flat, and the Piedmont having valleys and hills. The Appalachian Mountains are, they say, 250 million years old. And they're beautiful. Our next section heading, the interior plains. This means inside, the interior plains. West of the Appalachian Mountains, the land gets flat again. Here, in the center of the United States, Robert Louis Stevenson saw other plains, which we call the interior plains. The interior plains stretch across the middle of the United States, from the Appalachian Mountains in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west. Most of the land in the interior plains is flat, with many streams and rivers. In the middle of the country, these waters drain into the Mississippi River. Okay, everybody, how do you spell Mississippi? Mississippi. Mississippi. Here, the mighty Mississippi is fed by large rivers such as the Arkansas, the Illinois, the Ohio, and the Missouri rivers. Also in the interior plains are the 5 Great Lakes, which make up the world's largest group of freshwater lakes. Let's go look at those lakes. They're right here. In the eastern part of the interior plains, often called the Central Plains, the land is mostly flat, with numerous streams and rivers. During his journey across the Central Plains, Stevenson wrote that, quote, "The country was flat, but far from being dull. All through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa, it was rich and various." When Stevenson's train stopped in the middle of Nebraska, he saw the environment, or the surroundings in which people, plants, and animals live, was yet again different. This western part of the interior plains is called the Great Plains and includes parts of 10 states. In the Great Plains, the land becomes much flatter and the climate much drier. There are few rivers and almost no trees. To Stevenson, the land seemed to look the same for mile after mile. If you ever drive through this region, it looks the same for mile after mile. Stevenson wrote that a person, quote, "may walk 5 miles and see nothing, 10, and it's as though he had not moved." So how do the Central Plains differ from the Great Plains? He says the Central Plains were various. They were not dull. There were streams and rivers. The Great Plains, the same for mile after mile. The next section is called the Rocky Mountains and Beyond. As Robert Louis Stevenson's train moved west, the flat interior plains gave way to the towering Rocky Mountains. The Rockies cover much of the western United States and are our country's largest and longest mountain range. They stretch from Mexico through Canada and into Alaska. And we need to look at the map for that. They stretch from Canada. Well, let's start at Mexico. They stretch from Mexico into Canada, and all the way to Alaska. Like the Appalachians, the Rockies are made up of smaller ranges. The Rocky Mountains are much younger than the Appalachians. The peaks of the Rockies appear sharp and jagged because they have not been eroded for as long a time. More than 50 peaks in Colorado alone are higher than 14,000 feet. In the mountains, climate can vary, it can change as the land rises up. Because the Rockies are so high, many of the peaks are covered with snow all year long. Stevenson's train moved slowly, taking 2 days to cross the Rocky Mountains. Then the environment changed once again. Now Stevenson looked out the window and saw only desert scenes, fiery hot and deadly weary. Between the Rocky Mountains on the east and other mountains farther west is a large area of land that is mostly dry. It is sometimes called the Intermountain region. Intermountain means between the mountains. Part of this land is the Great Basin, which includes Nevada and parts of 5 neighboring states. A basin is a low, bowl-shaped land with higher land all around it. At the southwestern edge of the Great Basin lies Death Valley, California, the lowest point in North America. Part of Death Valley lies more than 250 feet below sea level. How do the Rocky Mountains differ from the Appalachian Mountains? The Rocky Mountains can be up to 14,000 feet. And the Appalachians and the theory is that it has to do with the age of the mountains and erosion. And our final section, more mountains and valleys. Stevenson's train left the desert and headed west toward more mountains. Lying just inside California is the Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada is Spanish for snowy mountain range. The eastern slope of the mountains is so steep that riders on Stevenson's train were pinned to their seats as the train climbed the mountains. Other mountains lie north of the Sierra Nevada in Washington and Oregon. These mountains make up the Cascade Range. West of the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Range are 3 large fertile valleys. Fertile means really good for farming. The largest is more than the 400-mile-long Central Valley in California. The others are the Puget Sound lowland in Washington and the Willamette Valley in Oregon. Along the Pacific Ocean in California, Oregon, and Washington are the Coast Ranges. These low mountains give the Pacific a rocky, rugged look. At many places, these mountains drop sharply into the ocean. Unlike the Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast has very little flat land. Okay, so these are the climate regions of the United States, and you can see that they are color-coded. So here we are in a semi-arid with a short rainy season, surrounded by Mediterranean and then desert. So look at how different the regions are as far as their climate goes. In Big Sur, steep cliffs have formed where the coast ranges meet the Pacific Ocean. Isn't that pretty? Robert Louis Stevenson arrived in San Francisco 24 days after he had left home. At long last he met Osborne, his sweetheart, who had regained her health. It's a happy ending, yay! He had traveled from one coast of the United States to the other. He had seen much of the country and many of its major landform regions. By taking a train across the United States, Stevenson had learned much about the country's diverse geography and climate. In summary, the United States is made up of 50 states, each with its own capital. Because the country is so large, its geography and climate vary from one part of the country to another. Geographers sometimes divide the country into landform regions.